Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today, we're doing Education Pathways Episode 2, which is Law. We're joined by Jardine. I'll let Jardine introduce himself. But thank you very much for coming, Jardine. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Rishi. Hi, everyone. My name is Jardine, and I am a bar course student and an Oxford Law graduate. As Rishi kind of introed, I'm here to give a talk for about an hour on law as a career path as well as a law school. This session will be quite content heavy, but don't worry, as Rishi said, this is going to be recorded, so you can always come back and revisit this. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat and I will try and address them all at the end. So let's begin. So first, a bit about me with my smiling face there. As I said, I'm a bar course student. I'm going to explain that in a little bit more detail later. What that involves is basically at the next stage after graduating my law degree, but we'll go through that. Started out at Sir William Borlase Grammar School, and then yes, I graduated from the University of Oxford about last year, about July. The roles section down here is just to demonstrate that I have do other things outside of law, and the law degree, no matter how intense it might sound, means there is definitely a life beyond it. I was part of two different charities there, working with social mobility, trying to help people get into Oxford and also become barrister in that sense. And also, I was leading hip hop dance society because, other extracurriculars. So moving on now, the agenda for today, we're looking to cover first law as a subject. I want to cover some misconceptions people might have concerning law as a career, as a subject, as what you'll study and things like that. We'll go through why to study law, why not to study law, the two main pathways of law, which is, solicitor, barrister, looking at some timelines, and also law school and everything to do with the application, how you choose it, interviews, LNAT, all the rest. So yeah, let's start with part one. That's law. So what is law? Law as a concept. Now, I wanted to deal with this question because I think everyone tends to have some misconceptions on how law works generally, how it works in the UK, and how it works as a subject. First, taking law as a concept. Depending on your life experiences, you may not be aware of other types of law beyond just criminal law. The idea being, you steal something, you go to jail, that kind of idea. But imagine, for example, I made loud noises at my house all the time and disturbed my neighbors. Some of you may think that would be a criminal offense that should go to jail for doing something like that, but it isn't. It's still known as a wrong legally, but that comes under the area of law known as tort law, which is something you may want to go explore. Beyond that, there are other areas to do with government, how the government works, to do with owning property, to do with wills, or even ideas known as intellectual property. The point being, law is the way we regulate society in all of its aspects. So there's a lot to explore and a lot to be interested by. The next point I wanted to make was that law is not perfect. Our country is very old, and we've been working on our system of law for a very long time, but we definitely haven't got everything right, even now. There's always room for law to be changed and improved on, which leads to my next point. The way the law works in our system is called a common law system, by which I mean every time a judge makes a decision in a case, that decision is sort of added to the law. So the law builds up every time a case happens. So if a judge says, I know the judge before me said this, but they're wrong, here's how it should be, the law would therefore change. That's very simplified because there's a lot of rules about who can say what and who takes precedent and so forth. But it's useful to understand that law doesn't just come from Parliament making laws and saying something, but also from judges' decisions. Now, moving to law as a subject and essentially why you should study law. Fundamentally, law is interesting. Understanding how we as a society have come together to come up with this list of rules on how we do everything is always intriguing to me, learning essentially how everything works. Secondly, because law is varied and vast, you can learn so much more about everything adjacent to it. Just the other day, I learned how steam engines worked because I learned the law on who should be making money off that idea. My advice to you is find the area of law that appeals to you most, and you'll learn pretty much everything related to it as well. Finally, because the law is not perfect and no one claims to have mastered it, the biggest benefit of this subject is the freedom to disagree. My favorite thing at university was reading all the relevant materials, coming to class, and disagreeing with everyone I've just read about, which you can absolutely do so long as you have a good argument, which I didn't always. Moving on now to why you shouldn't study law.
Sorry
If
to
there's,
interrupt, Jardine. I don't think the slides are actually moving.
oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, sorry. Yeah, that's just summing up what I was saying there. Thank you, Rishi. And yes, why you shouldn't study law. Sorry about that. If there's one main takeaway from this presentation I want to give you is that you do not have to study law for 3 years to become a lawyer. What I mean is, instead of doing a 3-year law degree, you could do a degree in whatever subject you want to do, and then do what's essentially a conversion degree known as the GDL. What that does is put the 3-year degree into 1-year degree of all the super useful information to become a lawyer that you need to know, taking out anything wider in terms of discussing the concepts. We'll go over the different pathways and timelines for that later, but it is something to bear in mind. Doing the GDL doesn't disadvantage you at all in terms of becoming a lawyer, and more people are using this route instead of the traditional degree. Secondly, it is a difficult course. It requires you to think critically about all sorts of topics you've never encountered before, even if you did law at A level or GCSE. Finally, this is not a STEM subject. You'll be reading lots of cases, legislation, old, new books, articles, extracts. You'll need to be able to learn to deal with fancy old language, technical legal terms. Then you're expected to write many essays on these and write well. Some of these skills you will pick up in your degree, but you'll need to demonstrate some potential for them in your application. The next thing I wanted to go through is the two main types of lawyer, because I assume most of you who want to study law are thinking about possibly becoming a lawyer, and it's important to understand the difference here. The two types are, as you see on the slide, solicitors and barristers. Broadly speaking, solicitors are the lawyers that speak to the clients first, provide the legal advice, draft the paperwork for court, and are employed by firms, as in companies of solicitors. Solicitors can also be employed as part of a certain company. For example, Apple would have solicitors that they employ that only work for them. Barristers, on the other hand, are the ones that tend to appear in court. If you've ever watched an English legal drama, then those are the people you've probably seen. They also provide legal advice to clients and solicitors, but usually a barrister's work might be more specialized than a solicitor's, so more specific advice in that sense. Barristers are also self-employed as a comparison, which allows them to a degree of control on how much they work and stuff like that. Barristers work in groups known as chambers, and different chambers have different specialisms. That's to say the broad strokes. Solicitors and barristers can come in all sorts of forms. Barristers can also be employed. I don't think solicitors can be self-employed, but these are just the broad differences you need to be aware of. Now, in terms of career timelines, so that is a bit low as a timeline, but you'll see there at the bottom, law degree in GDL. You start out in secondary school, and as we've already spoken about, you don't need to study law to begin with to become a lawyer. When I say you can literally study anything, you could study anything and then do a GDL. Though if you wanted to be very smart about this, studying, for example, engineering might be very helpful for you to then go into the law surrounding engineering and that kind of thing. Some law schools also include extra year that's why it says 3 to 4 years, an extra year where you study law abroad, maybe in France, maybe further afield. But if that sounds something you would be interested in, definitely go away and look at it. So the next stage after studying law school to become a barrister, this is you do the bar course for 1 year, which is the stage I'm at. This is where you actually learn how to be a barrister, all the necessary skills concerning speaking in court, how to argue well. I'll do a little bit of a breakdown in a minute, but that's the idea. Then you're moving on to pupillage. Pupillage is essentially paid work experience for 1 year. You apply to join the chambers for a year, work with them on cases. If they like you enough at the end of the year, they'll take you on as what's called a tenant. You're thus officially a barrister. Applying for pupillage is very competitive, so you have to make sure your application is in tip-top shape. This pupillage is essentially the stage where you'd specialize in the area of law, because even on the bar course, you're being taught both criminal advocacy and civil advocacy. Civil law being the wider everything that's not criminal, essentially. And pupillage at the chambers that specialize in certain areas of law is about when that starts to be, you decide which area of law to focus on. Though that being said, different chambers have different specialisms. You can go to what's called a common law chambers that does a variety of different work that you might want to look at. That being said, there's a lot you can do. The thing I have to caveat with this particular timeline, it's incredibly optimistic. Most of the time, you won't go straight from the law degree into the bar course or from the bar course straight into pupillage. Depending on the area of law you want to go to and how well you do at university will affect how long this journey takes. You may, for example, have to do a master's, a specialized 1 year degree, looking at the law in more depth to improve your qualifications to apply for pupillage. The average time to get pupillage is about 4 tries or 4 years because the cycle is every year. So that period between the bar course and pupillage might be quite a while. Moving on now to the career timeline of a solicitor. So as we've spoken, as we've pointed out, law degree, GDL, same kind of thing. Then you do the SQE, which is the bar course, is the solicitor equivalent of the bar course, learning how to be a solicitor. You usually only start the SQE if you have an offer for a training contract, which is the pupillage equivalent for the solicitor's firm. So before you start the SQE, you'll have the training contract like secured. So you will go straight into the SQE, out the SQE, onto the training contract, which is for 2 years. Similarly to a barrister route, you'd only really specialize during your training contract, working at a specific firm in a specific area of law. Unlike the barrister route, this timeline is a lot more accurate. Whilst getting a training contract is difficult, getting pupillage has been statistically harder. So you're much likely to get a training contract and do the SQE in the order that you see on screen. Moving now to what do you learn at the different stages. So the law degree will largely depend on your law school. There are some core topics that they must cover, such as criminal law, laws to do with contracts, and tort law, as I've mentioned. But other than that, the universities have a lot of freedom to teach you what they want to teach you. For example, both Oxford and Cambridge teach you Roman law compulsorily, even though that doesn't really impact our law at all. The bar course and the SQE, as you see, are both actually skills-based course that teach you to fulfill those roles. And you can even see in this, there's a lot of similarity between them in terms of in-court advocacy, conferencing training, legal research, and legal drafting. So the main takeaways to take from this. First, in terms of comparison points, becoming a barrister generally takes longer. As a bar course student myself, I do have to warn you that if you're in for it, you're in for the long haul and you have to be committed to this career if you want to do it. Second, on that, becoming a lawyer is expensive. I didn't include figures for how much the bar course and the SQE costs, but you're looking at courses that cost in the region of £15,000. Now, for the bar course, there are scholarships that will cover the entire cost. I myself are on the Castle scholarship that I got to cover the bar course in its entirety. For the SQE, when the firm that gives you the training contract for that next stage, they will pay for you to do the SQE. So That's to bear in mind. But if you have to do a master's or any other experience that you need to bolster your education, your application, it's best to keep in mind how expensive this can become. Now, those last two bullet points, choosing uh, choosing which to become and the difference between the roles becoming smaller, do sound kind of conflicting, but the decision remains important for you because it helps you decide what you're actually going to do in terms of which timeline and pathway you're going to follow. But the lines between solicitor's work and barrister's work have been reducing, especially in certain areas of law. As a solicitor, you can now appear in certain courts for your client, and you can also apply to become what's called a solicitor advocate. The idea being you can appear in higher rights of court, applying for what's called higher rights of audience. As a barrister, you'll be drafting paperwork, especially in your early years, depending on the area of law, and you may not spend much time in court at all. So I also put here the rewards and challenges because I have been making this sound very scary. But the point I want to make here is it is worth it. You become what's called a professional advocate. There is nothing better than coming up with an argument, making that argument, and having a senior lawyer in the form of a judge agree with you. Being convincing, being persuasive, there's nothing better for it, really. And if you get the chance to do it on behalf of people who don't otherwise have a voice, it's incredibly inspiring. But as I say, there are a lot of challenges. It is expensive. It is a long journey. There's a lot of stress and a lot of work. And the work-life balance will be hard to achieve. And it is incredibly competitive at every stage. But if you can get through everything, it is all really worth it. So now, moving on to part two and talking about the law school. Those who are already in year 12, oh, sorry, this hasn't been moving. Part two, there we go. Those who are already in year 12 likely know this stuff but in case you don't, it's useful to go through, especially for those who are younger here. So you are working towards your predicted grades in year 12. The main thing I would say to do that is do as well as you can. Generally, you want to be heading for A's and A stars, as those are the entry requirements for most of the top law schools. You'll then need to do the LMAT in the summer between year 12 and year 13. There is a day where appointments for the LMAT will be released. Be very prepared for that system to crash immediately because it happens every year. Unlike some other admissions tests, this won't be done in school or hosted by your school. You'll be doing it at a specific center. For those of you who've done driving theory already, it might be exactly the same center. And it will be done on a computer on some software. We'll go through that later. Then in October, if you're applying to Oxford or Cambridge, or January, if you're applying to anywhere else, you'll need to submit your personal statement. We'll go into more guidance for that specifically, but remember it's a reflection of you, your interest in the subject, and your experience. Then you may be invited to interview depending on where you applied. Generally, you don't often get interviewed for law schools, bar, Oxford, Cambridge, but always make sure to check the university's website or any other descriptions of the process that you can find. Then, provided you're successful, you get a conditional offer saying if you get these grades at A level, we will take you on as a student. Where you apply does change the weighting of each part of this process. Some universities value the LMAT highly. You have to do well. You have to get above a certain score. The essay part, which we'll go into, has to be of a certain quality. Some focus on interviews. If you've done all the paper application stuff, you do well in the interview, that's what they focus on. Others are very holistic. Oxford in particular, their policy is to look at absolutely everything. So if you didn't do as well on the LNAT, but you did well in your interview, that would sort of balance out in that sense. The only real thing that isn't weighted is your predicted grades. Once you have that sufficient grade, say it's 3 A's, you got 3 A's, someone who got AAA stars won't be rated more highly than you because of the higher grade they have. Moving on now to which law school should you choose? Now, realistically, Realistically, the only law schools that really do things majority different is Oxford, Cambridge, and Durham. The most important thing to think about when choosing a law school is the style of teaching. If you're the kind of person who would succeed in small group sessions with, say, two other people in your group and the tutor, then you will thrive at Oxford, Cambridge, or Durham, where the focus is more on small group teaching in terms of lectures or seminars. You will also be writing essays much more often at these universities in comparison to everywhere else. And the style of teaching doesn't really change throughout the degree. It is tutorials throughout, no matter the subject. The subject will increase in terms of reading or difficulty, but that is the teaching style remains the same. You may also do a dissertation, but at Oxford, Cambridge, and Durham, that's usually more of a choice than you being mandated to do one. In terms of everywhere else, the focus is on lectures, on seminars. You get written assignments maybe once a term as opposed to every other week. Um, but yeah, that's the kind of idea. In terms of content, the other thing you should be looking at when deciding, you have to be aware that Oxford and Cambridge give you a lot less choice in what areas of law you can specialize your degree in. Your undergraduate law degree, in general, is supposed to give you a overview of the most important types of law to go into. Whereas, so Oxford and Cambridge don't really give you a leeway to look into much else. You get two choices in your third year as to what else you can do. Other places have a lot more choice they can give you. Maybe in second or third year, you start to choose more modules, and there's other modules you have to do. But other than that, those are the main 2 points of distinction between Oxford, Cambridge, Durham, and everywhere else.
Sorry,
Finally, though,
do you be able to move the slide again, please?
oh, sorry, yeah,
Sorry,
yeah,
I
no,
don't exactly know how to remove the annotations. Let me work on that.
thank you. Um, yes, sorry. And finally, a point about prestige. When you're applying for pupillage or a training contract, it can't be escaped that an Oxbridge degree, Oxford or Cambridge, looks better than any other degree. There are lots of things being worked on to try and change that. Blind marking, so people looked at so that degrees are looked at without looking at where to for university, that kind of thing. But it's just something to keep in mind. Further, a Russell Group uni, which is the Russell Group, if you don't know, is the term for higher rated universities, also looked on very favorably. So that kind of thing should also play to your choices too. So entry requirements, looking at this. So here is a general rundown of entry requirements, though, like I was saying earlier, I would stress that you make sure you read your university's website because the information might be different depending on the university. The key thing to note for A levels is that for law, no subject is required, not a single one. You can study all sorts of stuff. For my A levels, I studied mathematics, physics, and history, which, if you told anyone, is a completely random set of subjects. There are subjects that are recommended because essay subjects are recommended just to, boost your suitability for the course. As the course itself, very essay based. If you haven't really written much essays at your A level during your A levels, you might find it difficult, at least to begin with. So as for GCSEs, most universities do not care. You won't see it mentioned. They won't bring it up at all. Some, one example is LSE, do ask for at least a 6 in English language and in mathematics, but beyond that, they don't really care. Sometimes they look for a certain high GCSE grade profile, but again, that's very specific universities. The LNAT, I'll be giving you some tips on in terms of what you should be aiming for to do that kind of thing. But you're essentially aiming to get above 30 to do really well. But to be completely clear, in my year, I got 27. I got rejected from UCL on that basis, but Oxford accepted me. So every university will view it differently, as I've been pointing out. Just a note also, some universities may require you to send in written work in forms of essays, or maybe they'll set you a question beforehand, but make sure to double check that before applying. I know Cambridge, for example, not all of the Cambridge colleges do that, but some colleges do. So always just make sure to check the website and check your information. Now, here is some things about the personal statement. Now, it has changed a bit since I did it to make it more fair and more clear to everyone what exactly you should be writing about. You can see up here the three questions in the corner, which is why do you want to study this course? How have your qualifications and studies helped you to prepare for this course? And what else have you done to prepare outside of your education? Why are those experiences useful? It's important that you answer all of those questions directly. There is some guidance on the UCAS website on what kind of things they expect and where, but if you have any questions, you can feel free to leave them in the chat and I will address them at the end. But general tips, they are looking for a law student. You can mention you want to become a lawyer, and that can be part of your reason, but it cannot be your only part. You must demonstrate some interest in some area of law. It can be different areas of law that you can mention, but you must justify that and demonstrate that through your exploration of the subject, whether that be reading books or other things like that, or doing work experience, or even coming to this lecture, which I put as a thing of exploring your interest in law, which is definitely something you can write. But be selective about what you choose to talk about. This is not a list of absolutely everything you've ever done ever, because that just looks like you're listing. You're not really going into what you learned or what you got out of these certain things. Pick your most useful examples, go into them, and show how that demonstrates your interest in law and your suitability for it. Make sure to have someone you trust read over your personal statement to make sure it logically flows. Although these are now three questions, you want to make those answers line up with each other and make sense. But be careful. A personal statement is personal, so only you can write it, and only you know the things about yourself that will add to this personal statement with the experiences you have. So make sure it's you writing it, not someone else. Finally, and most importantly, write confidently. You're applying for law because you know you'll be good at it and you want to do it. Make sure you show that in every stage, at every sentence, in every word. So, moving on, just a quick note about work experience, doubling down on this idea of they're looking for a law student, is there is no requirement that you should have done any sort of law work experience beforehand. Such experience can be helpful for you to decide which area of law, what kind of career you want to do, that kind of thing. And it is important to include in your personal statement any work experience you do where possible, but there is no expectation for you to have any. When I applied, I had no experience and no way of getting any because we were in lockdown. I therefore showed my interest and my ability through reading books, talking about what I read, going into breaking that down and going into what I learned from it, watching lectures, any lectures I can find online about certain areas I was interested in, attending online summer school experiences. Hopefully, you could do that in person, exploring the subjects at the universities you want to explore that. That's the kind of thing they're looking for, demonstrable interest in the subject. There are some ideas for work experience on screen now. Sorry, that should have been up. Shadowing a solicitor, attending court, or shadowing a judge. That is a good point to mention. It is always free to go to a court, sit down and watch. The whole idea of the court is it's supposed to be open to the public to see how law and justice is done. So yeah, go down to your local court, maybe even the Crown Court. Just sit in what's called the public gallery and just watch a case. Listen to how the barristers or solicitors speak. Listen to what the judge says. If you can watch a whole case through, that'd be really nice, but you don't always have to. I remember I sat in the Reading Crown Court when I first wanted to study law, and I watched a barrister make a really, really compelling argument about how a person wasn't there basically when talking to the police who was there as a witness, saying that this person was there. They arrested them at the scene. They were doing that thing, and the barrister expertly managed to explain how this person wasn't actually there, had come at towards the end, and had just turned up and got arrested. That kind of thing you can observe for yourself, and I highly recommend it, to be honest. But again, you don't have to do that. There's no requirement for you to do so. So, I also wanted to give you some tips on succeeding at A levels, some tips and tricks. So, because of the variety of A levels you could be studying if you want to study law, these are going to be very general tips. But a thing to keep in mind is revising for a STEM subject is different to revising for an essay one. So make sure to adapt your skills and your time equivalently, appropriately. The first thing I would say is choose your A levels based on your enjoyment, but also your skill level. I'll tell you now, I did maths. I even did further maths AS. I've never liked maths in my life, but I was good at it. So, and have been good at it for a long time. So I made sure to pick it as one of mine, and it was one of my A stars. You need to pick your A levels to get your best grades in order to secure your best chance. But beyond having an essay subject in that list, doesn't really matter what you do. The next point is to study smart as well as hard. It's no use sitting down for 5 hours staring at a page of notes. I find that after an hour and a half at max reading my notes, my brain gives up. Know your limits and work effectively to them. A general recommendation I found, a method that works for me, is do about 1 hour of work, 15-minute break, and cycle that. Some people recommend doing 30-minute chunks of work and then doing 5-minute breaks, but you've got to find out what works for you. Make sure to be active in your learning. Reading your notes is all well and good, but if you're not testing that knowledge, you have no idea whether you can recall that. Biggest way of testing that knowledge, do past papers. Not just reading past papers, not just reading mark schemes, actually doing past papers in proper exam time conditions if you can and when you can. It makes sure that your knowledge is up to date and you can recall it, but it also makes sure that your notes are in tip-top shape. If a question mentions something you haven't heard of, try and find it in the textbook. Sit down and learn it. But the only way you would have spotted that is if you'd been asked a question on it outside of the exam. Revising with other people is also helpful. The mental support of having other people around you is nice. And it is pretty much proven that having another person, even just directly across from you, can make you more productive, even if you aren't talking to them. Plan. Big, big emphasis on planning. Make sure to set your goals. Think about a timeline for when you want to go over certain things and cover certain topics before your exams. It also, if this is your first time planning revision, plan in some leeway, some catch-up days to make sure that if you don't cover all the content that you want to cover on a certain day, you cover later on a different day. Finally, a point I want to make is make sure to try and find a work-life balance. Your brain is like a muscle. It will get tired if you don't rest it. So making sure that you have something fun planned for the evening, or, at lunch, I'm going to sit down and watch this TV show. Keeping that kind of balance will make sure that you're the most productive in the times that you need to be productive. Finally, not finally, sorry, to give you some tips on the LMAT. What is it? How do you do it? So it has two parts. There is the multiple choice part and the essay part, details of which you can see on screen. The multiple choice section being 42 multiple choice comprehension questions, 3 to 4 questions with 12 argumentative passages. The idea being the passage would be like an article type thing on how cars should follow traffic laws. That's a bad example. Cars should follow certain rules, for example, and it'll be basically a small essay going, this is why this should be this. And you need to figure out, they'll ask you some questions on it, testing your comprehension skills, your verbal reasoning, the idea of like, where does this argument come from? Are they right in saying this? That kind of thing. You've got 95 minutes to do all of those questions. So the total time for the LMAT is about 2.25 hours. If that, do correct me if my maths is wrong, but 95 minutes to do all the questions. Make sure to do the practice papers on the website. The LMAT website has two practice papers. Have a look at them, give them a try. Try and spread them out because they're the official ones. So maybe do one towards the beginning of your revision and then one towards the end, just to make sure that you're testing yourself finally on the actual questions they might give you. And give a go at the simulator software because this is all done on the computer, by the way. That's the thing to make sure to mention. It will be typed or like multiple choice in terms of you select a certain A, B, or C, that kind of thing. And it will be done on a computer on some software and a simulator. And if you download the simulator software, you can test that, go through it, and make sure you know what it looks like. Do not, under any circumstances, buy any books or how-to guides. Not because they might not be useful, but most of the time they are scams. You can find free question banks online if you really want to test, if you really want to test that way. And most of the questions you'll find are probably way harder than you'd actually get in the exam. So in that sense, very helpful. But don't buy any books. Even coaching, I would be very careful about that, depending on who says they're coaching and what they want to coach on exactly. Because every kind of thing you want to test is something you just need to stop. You just need practice rather than someone necessarily telling you how to do it, unless you're struggling with certain questions. But yeah, bottom line, everything you need is online and free. Keep practicing that way. So moving on to the essay section now, you'll be given three essay questions and you choose from one and write an essay on it. Typically, it's on a topical area in the news. So one example now might be AI, art, or something like that. Or yeah, no, coronavirus. Well, coronavirus is long gone now. But I remember my one was about. Oh, do I remember? It was so long ago now. But I remember one of the questions was on migrants. I didn't answer that one, but one of the questions on illegal immigrants and stuff like that. So it really is completely topical areas of the law. I remember that morning I'd actually read the news and I included something that I read that morning in the essay section I wrote. But yes, that's 40 minutes to answer that essay. And yeah, if you're doing an essay subject at A level, which as I mentioned, recommended for law, use your A level knowledge of writing essays. Think about that structure, the Peel structure if you've covered it, the point, evidence, explain, link back to your overall point, and yeah, try your best to write what you can in 40 minutes. As I say, reading the news, thinking about the following is the kind of thing you want to be doing to prepare for this essay section. So, as well as being aware of current topics, even just other topics you're reading, think about the issues being raised, think about the assumptions being made, the information being relied to make certain conclusions, and then how you would frame a counter argument. Take the whole article and go, how would I say you're wrong, essentially? A point in particular when picking your point of view when it comes to the topical essays, the issue that comes with the topical area in the news is that you may pick something that's somewhat controversial. Don't go super controversial when you're picking out your point of view on the topic, mainly because if you offend the person marking you, they're not going to mark you very nicely. regardless of how well you argue it. So try and keep it within, I don't know what you'd say within, but try and refrain from being controversial about certain things. The way the scoring works for the LMAT is that as the multiple choice questions, you will literally just get a mark on how many of those you got right. And that will add up to a score. The essay is marked by different universities differently. They use their own criteria and their own ways of looking at it. For example, Oxford, they look at it for potential of, being able to write a good legal essay. Whereas UCL, for example, might go specifically like this has got to be this level of good, or LSE would look at it like this has got to be this certain quality. You may also get an offer or rejection from a university before knowing what your score is, because they're released very late, I think around February, although I have to check for this year, this upcoming year. So, and the only mark you get back is the multiple choice question. You will never know how you did on the essay because, like I say, all the universities mark it differently and they just won't go through with you at all. So, moving now on to the law school interviews, the few that you might have. For interviews, since they don't happen often and not with very many unis, I can't give you much guidance in terms of format. I can tell you about my interview where I had two interviews, one where I was given a rule of law and asked to apply it to different scenarios, and then they just kept extending the scenarios and seeing how I reasoned what I was saying. The second interview was I had to make up a rule for a certain scenario to ban a certain thing within it. And I can go through that in more detail if people want me to, but the details aren't necessarily the most important thing. Is the idea of you're trying to show your critical thinking, show you can work through certain scenarios and have the capacity to learn as well as come up with your own lines of argument. So yeah, every university does it differently. Even at Oxford or Cambridge, different colleges will do it differently. But here are some general tips for interviews. My first phrase is one of my favorite phrases. Speak word to your thought process. That doesn't sound very smart or make any sense. But what it means is when you are thinking about something, tell the interviewers what you're thinking about in your answer. So if you're not sure, start talking. Start explaining what your thought process is. Something like, first, I was thinking of looking at it this way, but then I realized that wouldn't work because they want to know what's going on in your head in the sense that they want to know how you think. Because that's the point of the question. It's not really too much of what you answer, it's how you think about the question and how you're demonstrating how you think. So, especially if they put a problem in front of you and they're asking a question, make sure you're talking about it. Talk about the way you will go through it. That's not to conflict with. Make sure you pause before you answer any question. Pause for 5 seconds. I guarantee you it'll feel like an age for you, but it will feel like a snap of your fingers for the interviewers. The pause will allow you to think your answer through. And also, having thought your answer through will give you the time to slow down the way you speak and make sure you're talking for clarity, which is important. You speak slower, more people hang on to your words and listen to what you're saying. A point about debate style questions, say if they ask you something like, what is the difference between a right and a privilege? Which some of you may be able to answer now. Some of you might want to go away and think about it because it's a very good debate style question. But what you want to do is try and think of three different points. If you can't think of three different good points, 2 points is still good, but make sure if you can try and get 3 good points. But 2 good points is better than 3 bad points or 2 good points, 1 bad point. Try and put only your best arguments out when you can. The next thing is know your personal statement. They might ask about it, they might not, but you have to be prepared if they do. In my interviews, they didn't ask me about it at all. But if they, in my mock interviews, it was quite a thing they brought up. Either they gone through it or they asked me something. They asked me something beyond my personal statement. Make sure you know your experience, know what you can talk about, have some examples ready to go for certain types of questions. So when talking about an experience, that's usually in the sense of a question like, tell me about a time when you've encountered a problem. That kind of thing. Think of this acronym STAR. You're thinking situation, task, action, result, learn. Explain the scenario, talk about what you had to do, talk about what you did do, what happened as a result, and then what did you learn from that experience. That is a foolproof method to going through an experience, getting all the relevant information out, and making sure that you talk about this in a way that it hits the skills criteria they're looking for when they ask you that kind of question. And second to last is practice. Do multiple mock interviews if you can. The most important thing I did in my prep was get mock interviews from my school, but I know a lot of schools won't be as helpful. So do it with friends and family. Get a list of interview questions from the internet or somewhere else, give them to them, ask them to just ask you questions, or even just hand them the personal statement, let them read, let them come up with questions. I'm sure they'll find questions that might stump you and mean you have to think about this in more detail. Finally, though, reach out to students at the university you want to go to and ask them about the interview. More often than not, students are more than willing to help people based on their prep and what they do. They can give you some tips. Maybe they'll give you their past interview questions from the late year, but use LinkedIn, use other methods, reach out to these people, send them emails. I'm sure someone will come back to you with a lot of help that can definitely help you through this. And finally, I wanted to just touch on some alternatives, being both alternative careers beyond the law as a subject, alternatives within law, and other ways into law. So, starting first with some non-law careers, you might see lawyers, politicians in the same kind of boat, uh, or consultants or business. But the idea being is the transferable skills of being able to take large scale pieces of information, being able to analyze and break that down is highly valued in whatever you choose to do. So, whether that be in economics or in consultancy or other things like that, these are other paths you can look at beyond your law degree. Because I know some of the best law students I knew didn't want to be lawyers. So, that is more than welcome in that sense. You may also want to further your exploration of the law in terms of research, being a legal researcher. That would mean looking into past law or new law or, you know, different countries, areas of law and how they approach things, that kind of thing. You may also want to work for the Law Commission. Now, the Law Commission is a body that basically makes guidance for the government, for Parliament to change how the law works. So they look at the current law, they go back through it, put all these cases together, come up with a list of what the law looks like now, and then goes, this is what it should be, which is essentially what you do in your law degree. But the Law Commission essentially does it for real. And the Law Commission's recommendations are often adopted by government. Sometimes they're ignored, but it's still a very cool career to be part of if that's what you want to do academically. Simply, you may want to also be a professor or lecturer at university. You may want to teach all the areas of interest you found. You want to write articles or books on these subjects. Finally, I wanted to go through some other ways you can get into law. There is now the idea of a solicitor apprenticeship. The details of that you have to go away and look at and see whether you qualify. But instead of doing the university degree and then going into the SQE and the training contract and so forth, the solicitor apprenticeship, I believe, takes the place of the university degree. And thus, I think you would also do the SQE within that and then the training contract within that too. And there is proposed plans to do barrister apprenticeships. Now, I have to caveat that with, I don't see that happening very soon or very quickly because particularly for certain areas of law, the kind of academic degrees they're looking for, I don't see them replacing those with apprenticeships. So that may be for areas of law that are pretty simple, but I'm not going to go through necessarily what I'd say is simple or less lower down the scale, that kind of thing. But there's also alternative legal careers. You may also become a paralegal, which is a step below a solicitor. And you don't have to have done this SQE, maybe just a law degree, and you still get to work with clients, work with solicitors, and you still get the benefits of the solicitor experience. Or being a judicial assistant, that's where you essentially, as the name suggests, you assist judges in their day-to-day workings and making sure that the court runs smoothly. And yes, I would say that is the end of my presentation. I wish I had a thank you and conclusion slide, but thank you. And thank you for listening to my talk.
Thank you very much, Jardine. That was really helpful and informative. We'll take any questions. I have one question myself, but I think we'll stop the recording.